Charitable Fund, as well as by the Adirondack Trust Company Community Fund, Kevin and Claudia Bright, Polly Sett, and our Virtuoso and Lifetime members. You can watch past episodes of this series on youtube.com/CafeLena. To learn more about our nonprofit venue and programs, please visit cafelena.org. Enjoy your front row seats for this event, live from Cafe Lena.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Cafe Lena. Welcome to the Art of Community. This is a monthly conversation series that we present in cooperation with the Chamber of Commerce, which is all about finding out what our nonprofit sector does in town, and mostly about how the leaders of those organizations know how to run their organizations, keep themselves inspired, keep from burning out. And all of us who really have committed ourselves as volunteers or board members or staff members to the nonprofit sector, the impact sector in this town, gather in this room and learn from each other and share news. So that's what this series is all about. We want to thank Bonaccio Construction. They add their support to this series, and particularly the Adirondack Trust Company Community Fund, which has given a donation that enables us to give you warm chocolate chip cookies and cups of coffee after the conversation. So we thank them for their commitment to the impact sector. So I am here today with Sarah Smith, who's the executive director of the Children's Museum here in Saratoga Springs. And it's a wonderful growing organization that has made some really significant changes lately. I can only imagine that you've been working 24/7 for the last couple of years, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But thanks so much for finding time in your incredibly busy schedule to be here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's super fun to come and talk about two things I love the most, which is leadership and the museum, obviously.
Right.
So thank you.
Excellent. So I want to go way back to maybe the beginning here to just find out how you got on this path in life of becoming a nonprofit leader.
Sure. I think that with many things, it starts when you're little. And so I am of an age that I grew up before there was curbside recycling. And so on a Saturday, we would throw all the recycling in the station wagon. I would go with my mother, and we would sort the bin into the bins. And, that started that volunteering in terms of ecology. And then my aunt runs a nonprofit, and so it is a preschool. And so when your aunt runs a preschool, every time you see her, you're doing some fun volunteer work. And so you're cutting out bunnies, and you are going over there to mow the lawn because they can't afford, the services. And so, it's an expected part of our family. And that's the way that I've raised my children. They often came to the museum as little kids to volunteer, to help, attend camp, help with camp, hang out under my desk.
Totally. How many kids do you have?
I have two.
I have two also. They learned to carry trays here
Nice.
at the cafe when they were about 13.
Perfect.
Wait on tables. And every time they come home to visit, they're 26 years old now. The first thing they want to do is come over and strap on an apron and help out at the cafe again. It's just where they grew up.
Yeah, it's like coming home to them.
Yeah.
So I think that's important, and it really sets you up for a life of service, which I think is important.
That's great. So you have you always worked in the nonprofit sector?
I have no idea what the for-profit world is like.
Out there somewhere.
I have gone so far as to work for a small private school bookstore.
Okay.
So, I have no idea what for-profit corporations do, or...
I get it. I'm with you.
It's foreign.
So, but you have also had, though, other jobs in the nonprofit sector. You didn't come in as the executive director. How's it different being the executive director?
So that's a great question, and I thought about that. because you get the questions ahead of time. I'm like,
That's why
what
she's
am I?
so smooth.
What am I gonna say? So being the director is super awesome, obviously, because you get to have all the fun. But you're the first to be blamed and the last to be recognized, and so you just bear that in mind. But I was an executive director, and then I had children, and I stepped back from the workforce, and then I entered again. And the only, starting at the bottom, literally, I worked at the Y in the babysitting corner, so I'd take your children and play with them and then give them back to you. And that was like 10 years ago. And so the problem when you're in that position and you want to affect change is that you don't have the power. They're like, that's a really cool idea, Sarah. See you later. So, being the leader lets you take the risks. It's really challenging and scary, but it allows you to, to see those visions come to reality, and that's incredibly rewarding.
It really is. It's like our sandbox, isn't it? Yeah. Do you have any formal training in management? What did you study in school?
So I studied American history, and then I got my master's in museum studies.
Oh.
So yes, I'm trained to run a museum, but I was trained in the decorative arts. And so I studied, when I was in graduate school, I studied case furniture. So like this piano, I would have studied that, and who made it and how was it formed. And I think that's super cool. I love material culture. I love objects, and they can tell you so much about the people who made them and used them. But like realistically, I found that children didn't connect because a lot of the things that were saved, they were made for and used by wealthy people. And I don't think that there's a great connection with the greater community if you're limiting it to that higher echelon of wealth. It just doesn't resonate in my soul. It didn't feel right.
Does your sense of objects, though, and how you studied them, does that play into how you have curated the museum?
It helps a lot with our outreach program. So we have a lot of tangible, hands-on objects. You want to have that authenticity. So that's super important. So, the bus really looks like a bus. It sounds like a bus. It feels like a bus. You're not really driving because there are no wheels. But, I think that's important. And also it's important, I've always worked in education, always worked with children, is understanding that they're not just short grown-ups, that they have their own needs and wants, and their opinions are so incredibly valid and fascinating, and the way their minds work is inspirational. And so, that's more of a driver. With outreach, it's important to have authentic, real objects, especially when we do our history-based hands-on lessons.
You're talking about how kids enduringly are different from adults, but this particular group of kids, young children that you're dealing with right now, have had a really unusual childhood because of the pandemic. Are you seeing any difference in how the kids interact at the museum or anything like that? Are you picking up on any of that?
Sure, of course. So a lot of the younger children, and so the children who were born during the pandemic, they are starting to re-enter society. And they're so curious and excited, but they're a little bit overwhelmed because they're not used to going to the grocery store, and they're not used to going to the library because they were kept at home or they were wearing masks. And so, that sort of the social emotional development of the children is a little bit different. I feel like they don't read adults as well, and they don't express themselves as easily. So it's just a matter of, giving them a little bit more space than we would have previously.
What does that look like in terms of maybe how you've adjusted the way that you handle things?
So super important to get down on their level when you're talking to them, and then also not expecting that they'll respond. Not every child is verbal. And just giving them the space to do what they need to do. where we've created some sensory times and some toddler times. We've also created a special zone in the museum where the kids can kind of decompress. So it's in our library space, and it's like a little nest, a little nook where there's special lights and soft things that they can touch, and they can just sort of decompress. And they're not going to use words like "I need to go decompress," but they will like grab their adult's hand and they will lead them to that space, or they will grab a book off the shelf and just sit down and focus. And I think that that's helpful. You have to follow their lead. It is the children's museum, so emphasis is on the little person. They're in charge.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And do you, as a staff, sort of like trade observations about this kind of thing?
Absolutely. We've seen a little bit of a different issue with our older children. So throughout the pandemic, we have been in classrooms as we could be, but we are starting to see on field trips and in outreach, we see children, they're not able to share resources because during the pandemic, they had individual materials and they were not allowed to work together as a group. They were not allowed to share like pencils and crayons and things of that nature. It seems very minimal, but it's a huge issue. One of our staff members who's here today was teaching a program, and we specifically give them limited building supplies so that they're required to interact with each other and ask like, hey, can I use that block? I will give you this rope. That we require that because we are building those social emotional skills that like working together cooperatively is pretty important.
Yeah.
It's important that they learn to build a habitat for the animal, but it's also important that they learn to work together and to communicate with each other. And we're seeing meltdowns. We are seeing unexpected meltdowns of children who are, they're in first and second grade, and pre-pandemic, those kids would be rocking it. They would be totally fine. It's not the school system. It's not the parents. It's an awkward situation, and we're just doing the best we can to help those kids catch up.
Right. Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It totally does. And, I can imagine that just, your heart must kind of break once in a while when you see some of these situations.
Well, the great news is that in the darkest of times during COVID, when we were on 69 and we didn't know what was going to happen, we said, hey, this is a terrible, terrible time. We see what's happening. We know what's going wrong. How can we use this time to the best advantage? And that was really, the introspection that everyone was doing. But we accelerated our timeline. All along, we've had this dream. We're going to move to the Lincoln Bass, and we're going to have a great, wonderful, huge museum. That has been the plan since the late 90s.
Oh, wow.
But we were able to accelerate that timeline and move, knowing that the children needed us now, but they would really need us if we can say the pandemic's ended, which we don't say, but it has slowed down, and so more people are coming out. They really need the social interaction.
Yeah.
And we've had 35,000 people through our doors in the first 6 months. So they
That's really
really,
compelling.
really need this interaction, and they're having a ball and they're playing.
That's wonderful. Well, that's really inspiring. And there are moments when when you really see those dreams come true that you've been holding for a long time. And that's really the joy of nonprofit work, is to come up with the great big ideas and then try to figure out how to make it come to reality. It's challenging, and it doesn't always go the way we expect. And so what I'd like to ask now is, was there ever a moment, like maybe within that project or just anywhere along the line during your time in a nonprofit, when you felt like the challenges of funding or staffing or marketing or achieving your mission were just like beyond you, and what kept you going in those moments?
Well, I think that's the challenge, isn't it? We were closed to the public. We were really struggling. I was really struggling, and I had a couple board members that I knew I could call. And if I was mad, they were mad. And if I was happy, they were happy. And if I just needed a boost, they were there for me. I think that's the key, is having that successful partnership with leadership from both sides, from the staff and from the board, because this is their passion. They're not paid for this work. This is something they believe in their heart of hearts. And so my board president at that time, he had been volunteering with this museum for 30 years because it was started when his parents helped. They were some of the founders. And so he started vacuuming at 8. So, 30 years down the road, he's 38 years old. And he and I are, essentially hiding under the table. Like, what are we going to do? And, the founders had always had that plan, and sort of launching onto that plan, having a rainbow at the end of the storm, super important. Having hope. And then we started talking to people in the community, and they were like, this is amazing. We believe in you. We think this is what our children collectively need. So, they stepped up to the plate. We raised, $3.5 million. In a short amount of time, we merged with another nonprofit that was struggling, the Children's Museum of Science and Technology, which is another children's museum. So we merged with that organization, sold our building, and moved, all in the space of less than 3 years. Crazy. Do not recommend.
Right. So,
but it worked.
Reaching out and having a partner to hang on to is kind of what is really gives you the confidence to keep going toward that dream.
100%. I mean, our current board chair is here tonight.
All right.
So, I mean, that is...
Can we have a wave?
Caitlin. Caitlin had her 10th birthday party at the museum.
That's so cool.
Sometimes people ask me, they're like, where do you find your board members, or where do you find your staff? They're so amazing. Like, obviously, they are amazing. Yes, we love them. But we grew them. Our director of outreach, the Scotia Glenville Traveling Museum, which we've acquired when we acquired Seamost, went to her classroom at Django. And, she went to the Children's Museum at Saratoga as a child. And so these are our people. We are starting to see that legacy help us grow further. And that's why we're so successful, is because we have this base of the community support and great visionaries. I mean, I don't come up with these ideas. We get them from the children. We get them from people who visit us. They have the best ideas.
I really agree with that. And, being out there on the floor and interacting with the kids and with the parents, I'm sure, is something that inspires you. For me, I need to get away from my desk and my computer and come out here and listen to a couple of songs during the show, and see people just transfixed by the music, to remember that all of the slog that you do in the background really does make good things happen and changes lives. What do you think? Can you talk any more specifically about what do you think motivates people to fund your work? What kind of impact do they hope that you will have out there in the community?
I mean, I don't to learn who have the strength and creativity and problem-solving skills to step up to the plate, and really looking to make our community more inclusive and diverse, and all these things that adults are learning. The children, we can grow them with those expectations and understandings, and make this world better by giving those children the skills that they'll need. Because, quite frankly, adulthood it's a lot. It's not so much fun. So if we can make them more resilient and give them those coping skills that they're going to need, then the generation grows stronger. A long time.
And how does the museum do that? How does the museum add to that? Because I know that, of course, their teachers hope to do that and their parents hope to do that, but you add something different, and not every community has one of you.
I think it enhances our community, obviously, to have museums and have that close partnership, but we look to build on those skills that the teachers are teaching in class, and that the parents are teaching. But sometimes this non-structured, the out-of-school learning, it hits some kids stronger. It can reconnect, connect with some that are maybe kinesthetic learners, or maybe they can't read, or whatever they're dealing with in their own world. Sometimes just having that less structured learning environment, that fosters their creativity and their sense of wonder and their discovery, and it just it makes that connection. So also my mother-in-law is really fond of this saying, which is constant washing wears away the stone. So sometimes just hearing someone else say something similar is transformational to a child. Hearing it from another voice, because they can't always hear their parents. I mean, my children cannot hear me, apparently. But if you were to tell them the same thing,
right,
they would hear you.
What do you think specifically are the big challenges for kids these days?
I think that they're a little bit overwhelmed. There's a lot of technology, and so postal compressing, and they're not on their iPad, and they're not on their phone, and they're not on the Xbox, which is the bane of my existence as a grown-up. But they're focusing on kids today that just wouldn't fly. Like that's just not socially acceptable. And so embracing that special time to really formulate their little brains and give them that time to be a child, to wonder and discover and explore.
Yeah, that's great. This is back to a you question. I would think that particularly during the expansion of the organization, but it can really happen at any time, and it can happen for anybody in this room who's involved in a nonprofit that their heart is all wrapped up in, and their imagination is all wrapped up in, and their hope to save the world is wrapped up in. Work can kind of take over your brain and become part of your life 24/7. Has that happened to you, and how do you fight it back?
I have responded to emails while I was in the hospital.
Yeah.
So I realize intellectually that I'm not doing what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to not burn out and stuff. That's not going to happen for me. I understand that. What we're trying to do now is that older senior staff at the museum is saying to the new staff members, hello, 24-year-old, you need to take your lunch, and you are not going to sit at your desk. You leave. I don't want to see, go sit somewhere else, go relax, read a book, go outside. We're at a park. There's 3,000 acres. Go for a walk. It's super important to model that for that next generation. We've also found that walking meetings are super helpful, and you're still working, but you're having fun.
That's great. Yeah. Do you have stuff that you do in your off hours to try and get your brain off of work?
That's a great question, and I have no answers for that. I mean, I don't know. It's really not a problem for me. I mean, there's a lot of, I still have teenage children, and so, I'm in fact leaving here and going to a wrestling match. Now, anyone who has ever been to a wrestling match knows that it's 1 minute of you paying attention and then 6 hours of waiting for your child to go back on the mat. And so there's a lot of downtime. So, you might answer a few work emails. You might look up some things for the gift shop online.
Right. Okay. So you work 24/7, and that's the way it is, but you're trying to save your staff from doing the same.
Trying to model that behavior for the future generations. I think that's important.
Right. Yeah. That's good. Let me ask you this too. This is my little trick of sort of pretending that I'm not working, but still actually trying to get better at work at the same time. And that is exploring new things, reading books, listening to podcasts, and doing those kinds of activities that grow my management skills or whatever skills I feel like I'm lacking that week. How do you learn new stuff and learn how to do what you need to know how to do?
I think that's key. I think that, that that feels like not working if you're listening to, there's a couple of podcasts I listen to, or the Nonprofit Leadership Lab that I'm a member of, and I just go on there and watch a few videos.
Gary, what's her name?
Joan Gary.
Joan
She's
Gary.
amazing.
Yeah, jot that name down if
Joan
you don't
Gary.
already know
There's a paywall, and there's also a free site that you can follow, and she's just really witty and crazy, and is a fan of Kermit the Frog. So obviously, she's good people.
I'm an Ernie person.
Oh, I don't know what that means. I'm more like the crazy scientist.
Oh, I love those guys.
Who's not articulate and just is blowing things up, because
totally.
That is what happens when someone's sick and they're like, "Oh, Sarah, can you teach this program? It's all about kitchen science." And I'm like, "Explosions, children, we are going to learn today."
What are the podcasts that you like to listen to? I'm getting my pen ready.
So Joan Gary, and also there's another one. Feeling her name is Julie Murphy. Barbara. She's Julie Campbell. Julia Campbell. So
Julia Campbell.
Yep, she's marketing, and marketing and social media are something that they're super important, obviously. But marketing is not something that I was taught in museum school, because marketing costs money. And so we didn't learn about advertising or any of that. That was not covered.
Right. So you've had to go out and figure that out for yourself.
Well, and also, we're really looking at, growing our board. Currently, we're at 13. We can go to 20. So we're actually looking at actively recruiting people who have those skill sets that, staff and leadership currently don't have, which is, the marketing savvy, looking at running the nonprofit as a business, which is... it's not all about hearts and stickers and happiness. You have to pay your staff real wages and have to make sure that they have health insurance, and like a 401k is pretty important. And someday we'll get there, but you have to make sure that you're running it in a way that is sustainable financially, which is important to donors and important to the longevity of the organization.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people sit in that chair and talk about that, and it's really interesting because I think that a lot of the donors don't have a lot of nonprofit experience other than caring about the issues, and so nonprofit leaders do get a lot of encouragement from their major donors to run the organization like a real business, and I've asked people like, well, what's the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit? And it's interesting to hear people struggle with that question, because we have to check a lot of the same boxes. You're absolutely right. We have to, make a budget. We have to follow a budget. We have to be really fiscally responsible. We have to be responsible for our staff and follow all the laws and the labor laws and all that kind of stuff. But there's just kind of a fundamental difference when you measure success as mission success and not as profit, not as financial profit. And it changes the entire culture of the organization, but it doesn't in any way let us off the hook as business people.
I think, and given the current job market, you want to make sure that you're proactive, that you're actively looking to keep your staff engaged and keep them, because they are the key to our organization's success, is because they love what they do and they're amazing at it. And the kids respond. So the kids know. They know if you're like, don't really like kids or if you like kids. And I always say that's something we can't teach. Like, I can teach you about science. I mean, not me, but someone else could teach you about science.
A child can be taught about science.
Right, but you can't teach people how to interact with children and how to treat them like they're people and not like puppies.
Well, then let me actually ask you this question, which is, what is it that you think people don't understand about children that you wish that they understood?
I wish that we would give them the grace to play, that we understand that they have they're not fully formed. Like, you can't expect them to behave totally rationally. They're going to be a little nuts. But I say you should embrace it. You should follow them, see what they're, get down on their level, see what they're thinking. Because I think it's fascinating. The things that they notice, or the things that they remember, or, there was a child I was teaching, again, someone was sick, and I was teaching about the states of matter. And it was in a second grade class, and they're like, there are more states of matter that you're not talking about. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're not going to ask me about plasma, are you? Because I did not have that in my notes. I got liquid, solid, gas, like, that's it. There's nothing else. Moving on. But they can get so engaged and so engrossed, and you see that in adults sometimes. It's just that whimsy, and I just I'm never upset if I hear a child crying or screaming or having a tantrum. I really wish people would just give them the space to be who they are, because don't we all feel like having a tantrum when we are waiting in line at the grocery store that we didn't want to go to anyways, and it's really expensive and boring and hot? Yes, I feel you. You have that tantrum. I can't have that tantrum, so you should have that.
Get it out there. Is there a story from the last year or so that kind of illustrates the impact of your work on kids or families?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that, when we started to reopen, we were only open on, the mornings over on Caroline, when we were allowed to reopen by the state law. We were allowed to reopen, and so we did. And, people were so thankful. They were so excited to come back. And then when we were first allowed to go back into the schools, I think that we had staff go to on some outreach, and they started calling me, and they're like, Sarah, the principal is meeting us at our car, and they're helping us carry stuff in because they're so excited. And, hearing the staff say that, like, the children were, like, jumping up and down, like, the museum is here today, because they didn't have people come from outside. They were used to, like, clowns and craziness, like, readers, and, everyone goes to the school. But during the pandemic, nobody went to the schools. And to see that excitement and that joy, I mean, that you are doing what you're meant to do when a whole classroom of, like, third graders is jumping up and down because you're, like, going to go in and talk about frogs. Whatever it is you're going to talk about, like, they're that excited to see someone that they don't know, who's going to bring in some things that they've not seen before.
That's great. What advice would you give to a young person who's kind of looking ahead at what they might do for their career? And let me define young as being somebody who's, let's say, they're getting into high school and they're starting to think about college or not college or gap year or whatever, and they're maybe sort of like swirling around looking for their purpose. What advice would you give to them about considering work in the nonprofit world?
I think that one of the best things that we did recently as part of our DEI work is that we removed the education requirement, because I think that some of the smartest people that I know do not have degrees. And I think that, allowing a child to look at working in a trade is super valuable. And so just exploring all the things, I think it's important to follow your passion. My oldest son is going into school, and he is going into finance, which sounds very cool. Anyways, he's going into finance, and I don't know anything about that, but it sounds awesome. But to follow that passion where it leads you, I don't think that nonprofit work is scary. And, I think there's still a lot of idealistic people who continue to do it. But as nonprofits change and become more savvy, I think that we can attract a more diverse network. So I guess my advice is more to the nonprofits to act more like a for-profit so that you can embrace the people who are coming in. That you don't have to choose between what you want to do and putting food on your table.
Yeah, yeah. You can, if you can strengthen your nonprofit to the point where it can pay people, competitive wages, then you can take advantage of the breadth of talent out there in the world and not just see it all go off to the banks or the insurance companies or whatever it is, and get some of that wonderful talent in the Children's Museum and the folk music club and stuff like that.
It's fun because you get to play or you get to listen to music like every day.
I do.
Who would say no to that?
Well, it's been great talking to you. We
Thank you
have
so
just
much.
spent a half hour, and I really appreciate you, drilling into some of these questions and showing us more about what's going on over there at the Children's Museum. Is there anything else that you want to say to the crowd before you sign off?
I would just say that we are incredibly committed to diversifying our reach. So looking to reach out to the Capital Region and meet people where they are in terms of making things affordable. And so that's been a really big push for the museum, is to have that financial access, that everyone is welcome at the museum, whether you have $10 or whether you have $3.
That's great. Good job. All right. Well, thanks for all your work over there. The Saratoga
Sarah.
wouldn't be the same without you. My kids sure loved it when they were little. All right. And thanks, everybody, for being here. And let's go off mic and just mingle and loiter for a little bit. All right. Thank you.